I also like democracy. So the point, so we have democracy, it plays a key role here, and let's talk about unions as a relatively democratic organization. So first, workers choose the process that workers that unions become in a workplace is a majority of members choose to create a union. Then also, once you're in a union, you have the ability to vote on things like contracts, the leadership. You also could vote whether or not to decertify, so get rid of the union. Then but most of the time that majoritarian logic holds. And to me, that is part of a functioning democracy. There are times when individual freedom works and there are special rights, but actually the law is, and as we've enshrined it, is in this case, majority holds. And that's important because I think it gets to your conceptions of freedom here. So, so behind this logic is somehow this freedom that you should be able to do whatever you want, whenever you want, but it's a really particular and peculiar kind of freedom. So think, when you work for an employer, think of all the things that you can be required to do. You can be required to, for example, shave your beard. You can be required to wear a uniform. You can be required to listen to political propaganda. You can, so you have your freedoms once you enter the workplace are different. They're not the same kind of freedoms we would have in other places. And so in fact, I would argue, I think you actually have the presence of a union and a majority vote, whether or not to create one, is more freedom than you have in other spheres of the workplace. And that's just on this negative idea of freedom or liberty, and which totally ignores the positive concepts. I don't know, sort of the idea that you need some power and agency to have true freedom. And sometimes that requires collective action to be able to have some power. And unions help give you that power. And so I am on the side of you actually have greater freedom when you have the ability to join a union, join together, and have majority rule.
I'm going to ask the first question. I'm going to ask it to you first, but I want both of you to weigh in on it. And that is, what, in your view, accounts for the decline in union membership over the last few decades? Because that is, of course, a pretty big social fact of the last few decades, and there are there's a lot of dispute as to what caused that I think colors this debate.
Yeah, so the basic facts, just let's lay them out. So for the past roughly 40 years, about unions used to represent almost a third of all workers in the private sector workforce. That has declined to less than 7% today. In contrast, actually, in the public sector, where there's, and I think this illustrates part of the issue, the public sector has stayed basically flat for the past 30 years. Slight decline very recently because of some political changes. And so what you have is, because I think the majority of the rationale for why unions have declined over time is that the law is very weak and gives employers lots of power to choose to, if they wish, make it very hard for workers to join a union if they want. To give just one example, the law is so weak, so the law does protect your right to join a union, but if you are illegally fired, and if an employer illegally fires you for trying to exercise that right, the remedy is so weak. Here's what happens. You're fired. You say, well, that wasn't right. This is a basic right. I should be able to exercise it. You go, you file a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. It will take them a period of time to adjudicate. Then there's a whole series of appeals. After all of that process, which often takes years, the best you can get is to have to be given your back wages minus anything you earned in the meantime. And presumably you went out and got another job, because not many people can make it for a year or so without a job. So you basically get very little, which gives very little disincentive for an employer that doesn't want a union to try to make it very difficult for workers to join. Because you also have polls showing that roughly a majority of the public would like to join a union if they could. So you have a significant percentage of the public saying they'd like to join a union. You have very few workers actually in unions. You also have, where the law is different in the private sector, roughly same flat trend. And you also have increasing evidence. There's lots of studies that show all of the things that employers will do, including firing workers, has increased over time. And so I attribute most of it's by no means the whole. There's clearly big changes in the structure of the economy that also matter, but I attribute it significantly to change in the law. And you can also see that when you compare us to other countries, especially Canada, which provides sort of some of the best cases because they have different laws in different provinces, and you can see how much that really matters for union membership.